At your hair.
Hare
So cute.
Krishna, dear
Hare
ladies,
Krishna.
welcome to the September Urban Devi Sangha and Women's Discussion Group. A special welcome to those joining us for the first time. If you are joining us for the first time, can you please write it in the chat so that we can all say hello? As I say every month, we are a very welcoming group, so we would love to welcome you and see where you're coming from. So my name is Radha Priti Devi Dasi, and I co-host this monthly gathering with our dear Rukmini Walker and Surbi Govinda Devi Dasi. So let me introduce our guest speaker for today. Radha Priti Devi Dasi resides in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, with her husband and two dogs, and with a unique background in nuclear engineering and project management. Wow. Radha transitioned from a successful career designing nuclear submarines for the Navy to a more profound spiritual journey. So, inspired by that transformative trip to India, she restructured her whole life to fully embrace and practice bhakti yoga. She has served as manager for the Wisdom of the Sages podcast, which we always get folks from that. So, welcome everyone, and Super Soul Farm. And she has also co hosted the Seeker's Quest podcast, which I hope that she will write it down in the chat so that we can follow along, those of us who haven't heard it yet. And she's currently a co host of the Bhagavad Gita in Action podcast, where she shares her passion for bhakti yoga and spiritual growth. So today, Radha Priti is going to be speaking about managing conflict from the inside out. And just a brief description of that before we hear from her. So she says, we've all had moments in relationships where conflict and misalignment bring us to our knees and they just leave us questioning our identity and the path that we're taken. And often it's that inner turmoil that kind of manifests as an outer strife. So we're going to be answering questions like what if we could harness the tools from our spiritual practices to not just manage, but prevent these conflicts. So let's explore all of that with Radha Priti. So welcome, Radha Priti. We're so glad to have you here. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Damodar Priya. I appreciate it. I'm so happy to be here with you all. It's such an honor to present at my dear teacher and friend Rukmini's Sangha initiative for women, and it's so wonderful for us all just to come together and as a collective and share and learn and grow. So thank you guys. Thank you everyone for coming. So yeah, my topic is managing conflict from the inside out. So I wanted to start by talking about comfortability with conflict. Right? Like, what are our preconceived notions around conflict? Is it bad? Is it good? Do we try to shy away from it? I know in my family growing up, any kind of conflict was seen as a bad thing. It was almost best to act like everything was harmonious than to voice any real issue with something. And if you did, it kind of made everybody uncomfortable. So it was really like taboo to kind of like get outside the lines. And that was difficult growing up because naturally, we are people and we think differently. And I mean, we all think differently than each other. And we all have our own authentic paths. So kind of expecting us all to be on the same page all the time was kind of a tough thing to live up to. So what I wanted to talk about today is if we're able to change our relationship with the way that we view and approach conflicts, such that we don't see them as threats, but actually opportunities to expand our perceptions and consciousness, not obstacles that crush relationships, but can actually enhance and strengthen connections. So that's my goal today in this workshop, to plant some seeds that, if nourished and perhaps contemplated upon, may help transform our relationship with conflicts from one of a place of fear and insecurity to trust and possibility. So let's first start by talking about internal conflicts. Internal conflicts often spill over into external conflicts. And let me give you an example from actually a very elevated soul teacher of mine, a spiritual guide. You may know him. His name's Radhanath Swami. I'm gonna tell you a story of an experience that he had in a New Delhi airport. He was waiting for a flight, and a union minister for the environment and ecology for all of India was sitting close by, and she wanted to speak to him. So, of course, he accepted, and she came over. And after a cordial exchange of welcomes, she launched into a serious challenge. She said, "What are you yogis and sadhus doing about the environment? The rivers are being polluted so much that they're literally poisonous, and tens and millions of people are bathing and drinking from those waters every day. Fish are dying in the oceans, the air is polluted, there's massive amounts of toxic waste being put into the earth, and you're sitting in your ashrams, meditating and praying and chanting your mantras. What are you doing for the ecology?" To this, he responded that if a person has boils on their bodies due to disease in the blood, then yes, we have to deal with the symptoms. But at the same time, if you don't find the root cause, the boils are just going to reoccur again and again and again. He said, similarly, the pollution of the environment today, we have to deal with the symptoms. And he says, that's what you're doing with the rivers, the oceans, etc. But what is the root cause of it? He said, it is the pollution of the ecology of the human heart. He says, toxic greed is causing people to pollute the world. Unless that is clean, even if you clean every river, the ocean, and all the land, it's all guaranteed that it will be polluted again. And I thought this was such a profound answer and so on point, too, right? And we can relate to this in our own lives, in our personal relationships with people, because we have internal identity crisis. And from that, how we interact with the world spills over. And then when we get into relationships with other people, we often project our own insecurities into that relationship. So if I feel unloved, I project that onto my partner. And I see various things he says or does, which may or may not have this intention behind them at all, as signs that he doesn't love me, right? Because I feel unloved. And so then I'm projecting that out, regardless of the external reality. So we have this inner disharmony that leads to inner conflicts that manifest as outer conflict. And because war arises in the minds of people before it erupts in the world. So to avoid the war, we have to remove the war inside of people. So fortunately for us, one of the most ancient and well-known yogic wisdom texts was written to help us with this exact issue. It's called the Bhagavad Gita. How many of you are familiar with the Bhagavad Gita? Yeah, okay, good, most of you. Okay, well, the very premise of the Gita, the very starting scene, one of the main characters, Arjuna, is confronted with his own version of like an identity crisis. He was put in a situation that challenged his entire conception of reality. And by just a set of really unfortunate circumstances, he's in a position where he has to fight to protect what is right against a lot of his friends and relatives. And he was a warrior in this world, in this war. And this was his duty to protect the people and uphold Dharma. Kind of like a police officer who pledges an oath to the community to do the same. So it's his job, it's his duty. But when Arjuna's in that setting, when he's getting ready to fight, he looks across the battlefield and he sees all of his friends and relatives. And he's convinced that he doesn't want to fight. He doesn't want to confront this conflict, even though it's his duty to fight and protect. When he sees his family and his teachers on the other side of the battlefield, he starts to question everything he knows, including his conception of what gives life meaning. And what he does is he runs through all these reasons why he doesn't want to fight. So it's his duty to fight. It's what's expected of him. It's his obligation to community. And he sees the other side and he has compassion for them. He fears that if he fights and he wins, how will he enjoy the kingdom without the people that he loves the most? And he worries about the impact that the loss of lives and traditions will have on future generations. He worries about the sinful actions that he'll incur by fighting such a war. Most of all, he's just confused and conflicted, and he really doesn't know what to do. And all of his reasons seem like really honorable, good reasons not to fight, right? So it's at this point that Krishna comes in and expands his conception of reality. Krishna is his friend, his teacher, his God, or his guide, and it's also the name for God. Krishna means all attractive, so it's the name for God. And he teaches Arjuna about his real identity as a spirit soul, and therefore his purpose in this life. And he gives him a larger framework of which to see his life and the purpose of it. And from this, Arjuna regains his composure and is able to make a decision based on higher principles and conception of reality that he didn't have access to before. But this only happened because Arjuna was open to hearing it. He was able to allow himself to experience the pain and the agony that he felt when he saw his relatives on the other side of the battlefield. He allowed himself to go through the process of evaluating his feelings and his thoughts. And then when he exhausted his own efforts, he knew where to turn to for advice, to Krishna, a trusted friend, and ultimately divinity. So this experience that Arjuna had can be synonymous to our very own experience when we're faced with conflict, something that shakes us to the very core of who we are, challenges our very conception of reality, of what is right or what is wrong. When we feel so bewildered or afraid or scared, what do? How do we react? Do we allow ourselves to feel, or do we push it down? Do we put a mask on it and act like it's not real? Medicate ourselves with food or alcohol or binge watch TV? Do we blame the outside world or circumstances? Right, so this brings us to our first principle in dealing with conflict is to be bold enough to feel the feelings and brave enough to inquire deeper into the root cause of them. Right, so Arjuna, he's a warrior and he's in the middle of the battlefield and he's breaking down. He's exhibiting physical symptoms of fear in the middle of a battlefield, which like makes him automatically vulnerable, right? Well, he should have every reason not to do this. He allows himself to feel it and to show it. He goes through this process. He gets in touch with where he is and where he isn't. And that process eventually brings him to the point of falling to his knees, acknowledging his complete bewilderment and asking for help. And the very fact that Arjuna was courageous enough to go here is the impetus for all of the teachings of the Gita. He doesn't claim to know all the answers. He puts everything he had on the table. But when he himself recognized that wasn't enough, he knew when it was time to surrender to the process and ask for help. So this is really profound. And it might even be easy for us to say, oh, I do this, I feel I did. But the reality is, I know for me at least, I'm 7 months pregnant right now and I'm like really going through it. And when I need to tune it, when I'm really going through it, the first thing I want to do is like numb out. I want to turn on Netflix. I want to see what's in the fridge. I want just something to not think about it, right? So this is actually, for me anyway, it's really hard in practice. It's really hard to just allow yourself to feel and to really dig deep into what's going on and to really try to decipher between what's real and what you're just experiencing in that moment, right? So Arjuna does this. He gets to this point where he's ready to surrender. And this brings us to the second principle is to know when to look for guidance outside of yourself for answers. Sometimes we like to believe that we can just do it all by ourselves. I know I get into that mood. Like, I'm an independent woman. I've got this. I don't need any help outside myself. And the truth is, we all do, right? We all do. As strong or as smart, as capable as we are, we're still incomplete. And we're still never going to have all the answers. So it's really so profound to be able to know when to look outside of yourself for answers. Right? And this could be a trusted friend, a therapist, or like Arjuna in the Gita, divinity. So sometimes it's just knowing when it's time to go inside and get really contemplative and honest with ourselves about where we are. And then when it's time to seek guidance or higher knowledge outside of ourselves. And this too can be really difficult when we want to run or hide or stuff it down, right? Or we're embarrassed. We don't want to confront these things, not with ourselves and especially not with other people, right? But if we can use this inner turmoil as an opportunity to look outside ourselves and expand our consciousness into realms that might help us see our current situation in a new light, this can be revolutionary in the context of our lives, creating changes that upgrade our consciousness and transform our reality. So let's assume here that all of us are able to do this. I'm 100% not. I'm still really working on these principles, but let's assume that we are. And we have some conflicts in our life. We're able to feel the feelings. We're able to recognize that we need something outside of ourselves for guidance. And let's assume that just for the purpose of this discussion, that something higher than ourselves might be the wisdom of this great yogic text, the Gita. So let's dig into some ways that the Gita can help us expand our conception of reality, giving us real tools to deal with life's challenges in the form of conflict. And the first place that we will start is redefining our conception of reality as it relates to who we are and our place and purpose in this world. So I'm going to share my screen. I have a little PowerPoint that's really I just have a few slides on it, so we'll be flipping back and forth. But for this point, this is the third principle, defining our place and purpose in this world. So when we think about defining our place and purpose in this world, and in the context of a relationship with somebody, we can approach a relationship with somebody with the mentality that I am God, right? I am the all-knowing. I'm always right. What I say goes, right? We all know people like this, right? I'm sometimes this person, I'm not going to lie. Okay. Or we can approach a relationship where the other person is God, right? They're the all-knowing. My job is to please and serve them, whatever they say goes. But what we really want to kind of fine-tune our reality to is that we're all parts of God and we have partially right understanding. Right? It's like, have you ever been in a relationship with somebody who can't say sorry? I'll go ahead and I'll throw my husband under the bus for a minute and say, when we first got married, he could not do this. And I'll be honest, I'm the one who probably screws up 90% of the time in our relationship. But the 10% of the time that he did screw up, he struggled saying sorry. And I think after me constantly apologizing to him for things that I did, which is like, constant, because I can kind of be a hothead sometimes, and then inquiring as to why it was so hard for him and telling him that it actually made him more lovable, he was able to change his conceptions around it. And now he's actually like constantly apologizing for things that aren't even his fault. And I'm like, okay, you don't have to apologize for that. But when we got married, he definitely had the conception that making mistakes or being wrong made him unlovable and unworthy. So first, it's like we almost have to be okay with knowing and almost expecting that we'll make mistakes. Right? We oftentimes will not be right about things, and that's okay. That's just part of the human experience. Being able to recognize and own it doesn't actually make us less lovable. It makes us more lovable because it connects us in this shared experience, knowing that we're all limited. So if we can expand our consciousness by understanding our place and purpose in this world, then we can realign with reality. The reality that God is infinite and has infinite cognitive capacity. And we're just a small part. We're just a small parcel of his energy. So naturally, we have finite understanding. And we need to reevaluate the belief that we're complete and have it all figured out and know everything. And get comfortable with the prospect that maybe we don't, right? Because that's our natural position. And thinking anything other than that is really trying to claim a natural position that isn't ours, right? So let's talk for a minute about how we feel when we realize I'm wrong. Right? If we're in a conflict with someone, we realize I'm wrong. If it's small, it can be relatively easy to accept. But if it's big, this could be a major building block of my reality and my identity. So it's like the ground is being pulled from under me. So in this, we really have to evaluate what we're holding on to in this life that defines us. Right? Oftentimes our achievements define us. Like something we're really good at, we take identification with, like, right? Like I was a nuclear engineer. So automatically, like that's what I am and that's what I do. But what happens is sometimes our achievements can confine us, right? They can cause us to put ourselves in boxes. And then it can be really dangerous when we attach our value to that, right? Because even these identities are temporary, right? They're not lasting. Like I'm a ballet dancer, so I'm perfect at ballet. But then if I mess up once, this means I'm bad and I lose value, right? Or if I break my leg and I can't dance anymore, what does that mean for my conception of who I am and what in my functional identity? So what we really want to do is upgrade our consciousness to the understanding that we're part and parcel of God, and that our value does not come from what we know, but how we contribute, how we show up. Right? Do I show up as a vessel of light and love to share with the world? Or do I show up with an egocentric mentality where I need to be the most perfect, the most right, the smartest, the most talented? Right? So we want to identify with something bigger than ourselves. So we're not the center, but we're serving the center. And therefore we know who we are at the highest level. And these little challenges to our functional identities, our temporary identities, that ballet dancer identity, will become small waves that we can watch and observe as they move through, understanding their context to the big picture and our natural identity, our real identity. And those smaller changes will no longer shake us to the core. So let's talk about how this works in context of a relationship with another person, right? How this is practiced. So when we're talking about starting to have relationships with other people, what we want to focus on first is our relationship with divinity, right? Really getting stable in this relationship with divinity. Who am I and what is my purpose? And really cultivating and nourishing this relationship. And what will happen when we can start to get really stable in this identity and this relationship is that when we start to have relationships with other people, we have an outer maturity, right? So what happens is that if you become less dependent on myself, my sense of self-worth from another person, so like even if he doesn't treat me the way I want, it doesn't break me or knock me down because my relationship with divinity enables me to have maturity in relationship with the other person. And when we have outer maturity, there's less unhealthy attachment. And so talking about relationships, another struggle that we can have when we enter a relationship with someone before we really have proper footing on our relationships with ourselves and our identity. And in that, we can confuse our actual identity of who we are with who we are with, right? Like we all know people like that, or maybe a person like that who's like kind of like a chameleon, like when they're with this person, they're like this. When they're with this person, they're like this. When they're with this person, they're like this. We don't really know who that person is, right? Or what they're actually like. And this could be dangerous because all it takes is that one emotional attachment that seems harmless and even wonderful at the beginning, but can slowly start to take them on a downward spiral as they solely linked their identity to another person. So we don't want to link our identity to our achievements, to our roles, to the people in our lives. We want to understand that those things are temporary. And therefore, we want to seek an eternal identity. And in that, we can get rooted and grounded such that it supports all of our other identities and allows us to really show up from a place of love and openness and a level of detachment where we can really serve purely. Right? So when we say soulmate, what we really need to say is focus on the soul, find a mate later. It's like the Bible quote, what is the profit of a person if you get the kingdom, but you lose your own soul? Right. So this is of paramount importance, really establishing and getting grounded in your relationship with divinity before bringing someone else into the picture. So that's the third principle. The fourth principle is realigning our expectations. So we say we're grounded in ourselves and our relationships with divinity. We know who we are and who we're not, and we feel capable of having a healthy relationship. So I'm kind of talking about romantic partners, but really these principles can be applied to any relationship that we have, whether it be family member, work colleague, friend. We have to understand that this expectation of perfect compatibility will lead to conflict. So we have to learn to realign our expectations, knowing that even with the most compatible person, things won't be perfect. There will be differences. So if we can moderate our expectations and have greater acceptance, knowing that if I wait for a time where everything is perfect, it's never going to happen. And the Gita helps us with this too. Right? Through the Gita, we come to know that the world is a place of distress. And that's not to sound like a Debbie Downer, but it's just to understand that the nature of the world that we live is that it's constantly up and down, right? Just even like if we look at our environment, it's up and down. If we look at our internal environments, it's up and down. What to speak of everything in between, right? So this doesn't mean that we have to be in pain or disease. It just means that distress will always be a part of our life experience. And what then we can see where distress is being increased by another person or my actions, or if it's a result of who I am and who the other person is. So we can work on that. So if we moderate our initial expectation, we can move on to deal with subsequent situations and stop seeking utopia in our relationships, jobs, health, social environment, etc. The other thing that the Gita can do is it can help us change our definition of success from one of everything happens as per my desires to my desires harmonize with higher realities, right? So changing that metric of what success means to if everything goes my way, that's a win. To kind of expanding your reality, your consciousness, to understanding that you may not know everything, and sometimes the way things arrange is actually in your best interests, and you just may not be privy to that bigger picture yet. So I'll give you a personal example of this. Right now, my husband and I, we live in a suburb of the city of Pittsburgh. We have a nice home, a nice community here, all of the things. But as we're starting to have a family, I'm thinking that it would be nice to move out to the country, closer to a temple or a spiritual community with kids. So now, since I left my job to study a few years ago, I left my job to study and to serve. My husband has pretty much taken full responsibility of our finances. And I totally trust him with this. He's responsible. He's always looking out for us. I have no interest in going back to work. So the way we've kind of established these roles for us works right now. And he's up for moving to the country. In fact, he thinks it's a good idea. But due to various circumstances, every property that we found so far, he has a hard time fitting it into our financial picture. And he isn't convinced that it's best for us right now. Now, he's also super risk adverse, I'll tell you that. My risk posture is probably much more than his. He's very risk adverse. So it's disheartening to me that it just doesn't seem like it's going to work out right now. And I know I could probably put up some resistance, but because I've kind of accepted our roles and responsibilities as they are right now, and therefore his competency at it and his risk posture, etc., I accept that it's really probably just not the right time to move right now. And the bigger picture really could have nothing to do with finances, and it probably doesn't. But for whatever reason, the pieces aren't aligning for it to work. So I'm not forcing it. I'm just accepting it. And though my desire is different, I accept that there's probably a bigger plan that I may not fully understand. And for whatever reason, I just don't see it yet. And so I just surrendered to the process. And so that's kind of an example of things going away. And I haven't always been that way. The only reason that I can do this now is because I've forced things so often in my life and it's turned out so badly for me that I've learned this lesson the hard way. But it also can really save you from conflict. It's just kind of accepting where the boundaries lie, what you've kind of established, and then just accepting whatever falls from that, right? Without trying to be the controller, the artificial controller, or making something different, right? So another principle, we're on the fifth principle now, that can cause conflict in relationships is a difference of perception. I'm going to show you one of my favorite pictures. I love this picture and I actually think about it a lot. Okay, so this is six blind men approaching an elephant and trying to identify what it is that they're seeing. And based on the angle or the part of the body part of the elephant that they've come up against, they identify it as different. So you see here, one thinks it's a fan because he's up by his ears. One thinks it's a spear because he's looking at his tusk. We have a tree, a wall, a rope, a snake. Right? And this is what happens to us because we all have this limited partial understanding when we approach a situation or whatever it is. We may be so convinced in our perception that we can't even hear somebody else's when really from where they are, from what they're seeing, from what they're experiencing, it's actually just as correct as ours is. Right? An example of this in our personal relationships is, have you guys ever heard of this book, The Five Love Languages? Do you guys know this book? It's a great book. It's for like couples. The theory behind it is that there's these five ways that we show and receive, express love. These five ways are words of affirmation, physical touch, receiving gifts, quality times, acts of service. So the idea is that like me in a relationship with my husband, there'll be a certain way that I feel and experience love. So say mine is words of affirmation. So that's how I feel and experience love. Say his is acts of service. That's how he feels and experiences love. So if I'm just giving him constant words of affirmation because that's how I feel and experience love, and he's just giving me acts of service because that's how he feels and experiences love, we're going to be like on different tracks, right? I'm not going to feel and experience the love that he's trying to give me and vice versa. So there has to be some kind of like reconciliation there. We have to kind of have, and this book is designed to help people do that, to help people kind of sit down, identify how they feel and experience love, and communicate that with their partners in a way that they can gain better alignment in that, right? So just because he's not giving me words of affirmation doesn't mean that he doesn't love me, but he just shows it in a completely different way. And in that, we're just misfiring. Right. So this is a big if we could really start to see things like this, and it's easy to talk about this like conceptually, it's like, oh yeah, I get that. That makes sense. But when we're actually in it, when we're actually fighting that fight, when we're so hell-bent on what we think and we are convinced that we've assessed every angle of reality and we know the right way. You know, it's so hard to kind of sit back and say, okay, maybe I don't. Maybe there's something that I'm not seeing. Right? But if we could learn to approach every conversation like that with that kind of mentality, even if we've done our homework through and we are thorough, if we could still show up like that, it could make such a difference in how we interact with in our relationships. Right? So we have objective reality and subjective reality. So objective reality is really important in science. But when we want to recognize our emotions and our humanity factor, the subjective reality becomes more important. So like 50, 60, 70 years ago, journalism, for example, was more fact-based. But nowadays, it's more about creative, nonfiction, human experience, perspective, emotion, things that make the experience of life variegated. So for us, this means getting comfortable with the gray area. The challenge is not in defining your reality, but expanding your reality. And this is where true connection exists. But if I can even see my preferences changing, my consciousness evolves and my life becomes more stable. So like an example of this, when I was younger, I loved math. math was like the bell would ring for class to change, and I would take 3 more minutes so that I could get through as many math problems as I could because I just loved it. And what I would do is I would do the math problems. Then I would go up to my teacher's answer book and see how right I was. And then I would go back and see what I could learn from that and then move on. And it was like I loved being able to solve a problem and then see if I was right or wrong. It like gave me some kind of like satisfaction. And then as I got older, I started to get more interested in subjects that weren't so black and white, that I couldn't just go and check if I was right or wrong. Right? Things that were had a little bit more gray area. And I started to get more comfortable with that. And that to the point where I would seek that out more, right? Like when I first started my career, I was just like making mathematical correlations in the corner of my office. And then when I ended my career, I was like managing people and programs. And I found that so much more interesting, right? So, but there's a time in my life that it really served me when my life maybe wasn't so stable and I really needed that like black and white. I needed something like tangible and something that felt like real, right? So this can kind of happen to us as we progress, as we kind of get comfortable with this, what this is, what this means when our consciousness expands. And we can grasp on to a higher reality that we don't need to be so confined in our own reality. Okay? So if we look at perception in the mode of goodness, what we would consider a home run is if we're able to really fine tune this tool and that we can see differences and we don't deny them, but we see underlying commonality, recognizing the unity and diversity, understanding that similarity comes from the bigger picture. So in that, the similarity is foundational and the differences are secondary, but we don't let differences blind us to similarities. So for example, like my husband's Catholic and I follow this very different. I follow bhakti yoga, spiritual path. So if anybody looks at us from the outside, they say, "How do you guys make that work? It's so different." And they are different. You know, our day to day, the way that we follow our past, the way that we express is different. But on the highest level, our principles are very similar. What we really believe in at the core, the principles, the principles that guide our interactions and our values and our decisions are very similar. It's just that the way that we carry out our day-to-day lives is different. And that does mean, maybe we don't spend as much time together, or, there are some drawbacks there that I can't deny. But at the same time, there's hardly ever any conflict or struggle or disagreement, especially at this time, because we really respect and value each other on those principles. And that enables us to support and respect each other on the lower levels, the way that they're carried out, and allow space for that without maybe being threatened or feeling excluded or something like that. So these kinds of things, they can happen. So let's look at another pendulum, because who doesn't love pendulums? When we talk about differences, we can see no differences, like artificial unity. To be honest, I felt like this was kind of the goal of my family growing up. Like, let's just act like it's all the same. And if it's not okay. Or we can see only differences. And this can be just like super confrontational, right? Like it's if you ever talk to somebody from maybe a different spiritual path, and the first thing they want to talk about is the things that they think will be different than theirs. And it's like you can't get them off of that, right? But what we want to do is acknowledge our differences, but focus on the similarities. So we're not like denying our differences. They're there, but we're focusing on the similarities. So we celebrate differences because they make the world richer. We love from the essence, and we tolerate and celebrate diversity within the foundation of unity. Okay, so this brings us to our last principle, and that is sharpening communication. So let's talk about communication. Let's first talk about the mood of which we approach communication with somebody. right? And kind of the evolution of our own consciousness that we want to try to cultivate in approaching this. So first we need to get that I don't need to know everything, right? That's not my goal in this life. I don't need to know everything. And from there, maybe we can evolve to, I can't possibly know everything, right? If we can really digest this, I'm part and parcel. I'm not the whole. I serve the whole. Therefore, I cannot know everything. Then we can elevate to, I don't know everything, right? And that's not just like something that we say because it's politically correct, but it's something that we imbibe and we've really realized and we're okay with. And that shows in our communication in the way that we carry ourselves, right? Because if the goal is to grow and learn and we understand that we're part of the whole, then we want feedback to get better. And if not, then we're just stuck in our ego. If we understand that I'm part of the divine and therefore I see part of reality, so then when we approach communication, we want to have a good mix of curiosity and humility. And this is like paramount. If you can start to approach your communication with people from this perspective with a healthy amount of curiosity and humility, you could transform all of your relationships, right? Because if we have no humility, if we have humility but no curiosity, we have stagnation and no growth. Not much is going to happen there because we just don't really care enough for it to, right? We don't really have any level of inquiry, but we're humble. If we have no curiosity and no humility, it's going to be extremely alienating, disconnecting. And if we have no humility, but we have a lot of curiosity, the only reason we even really want to engage in a conversation with somebody is so that we can refute and reject what they're saying. That's kind of, but if we have curiosity and humility, our relationships become understanding, it becomes endearing. And this is really where, again, the true connection happens, the true growth. This is really where we want to be. So if we have this ideal mix, then we understand that what I don't know is actually more important than what I know. So that's the mood. So now let's just briefly talk about characteristics of good communication. The Gita says communication should be effective and sensitive. So effective is grounded in reason or the objective reality, like we talked about. It means being truthful, but still helpful. So if you tell everyone all of their faults, that's unhelpful because it's not like they can change that fast. If I'm like, all right, husband, let's sit down. Now I want to tell you everything that I don't like about you. Right? Like that's just like not really conducive to growth or connection. So the Gita also says communication should be sensitive. This is grounded in the emotion, this subjective reality. This means that speech should be non-agitating, pleasing. We should try to be aware of a person's tender or vulnerable spots. We try to exhibit respect, concern, patience. And how do we develop this sensitivity? We ask simple, open-minded questions, or open-ended questions, sorry. So we don't approach conflict from a place of criticism or like the fear-based mentality, right? Like, how can you think like that? We approach, or even if we say, how can you think like that? Right? We approach from a place of curiosity and openness. Like, can you explain why you think like that? Not like we already have it all figured out and we're just kind of, it's just kind of an exercise, but like we really want to understand. We recognize that there's something that we're not seeing and we want to be able to see it. Right? And that's from a place of love and security. So sensitivity begins with this humility, knowing that you don't know anything about it or the other person. And maybe even if you think you do, just being okay with maybe the aspect that you don't. There's something big that you're missing. Right? So ultimately we have to learn to live with conflict. If we see that there's something common that we share that can bring us together. Right? There may be disagreement that may remain on specific issues, but if there's agreement on deeper values and purposes, like what is it that really matters? What is it that we really value? So, like at work, it may just be accepting that for that 8 hours a day, you and your colleague have the same goal towards this work project. And it's okay if you don't align on political issues, etc. Just learning to accept and appreciate your colleague for what their contribution is to your mutual goal at that particular time, and not really worrying about the really letting that making that mean anything. At home, it may be focusing more on the values that you share, the higher principles that you share, and less on the way that you obtain them. Again, example, if you have a different spiritual practice than your spouse. So in conclusion, I wanted to just take a couple minutes just to breeze through these points that we talked about, just like the takeaways, right? So the first one was to be bold enough to feel the feelings and brave enough to inquire deeper into the root cause of them. This is where we talked about Arjuna in the middle of the battlefield going through it. He has physical symptoms that are showing on his body of his just complete bewilderment and desperate condition. Just he's really broken down, right? And that's the first step for a lot of us, is just acknowledging and letting yourself feel it, knowing that it's there. And then the second one, know when to look for guidance outside of yourself for answers. So this could be a trusted friend, a therapist, or like Arjuna in the Gita, divinity. Knowing it's okay, we don't have it all figured out, and sometimes we need help. And there's not a single person in this world that won't have that experience at some point where they need help. They need something outside of themselves to get to the next level. And that's why we're all here, right? That's like a beautiful part of this experience. Takeaway 3, getting grounded in our identity. This is where we talked about really working on realizing our place and purpose in this world. And for this, spiritual practices can help so much, whatever your spiritual practices are, meditation, chanting, reading, or just association with like-minded people. It can really help us to start to realize our identity in this. The fourth one, understanding that this place is a world, that the world is a place of distress. Again, this isn't to be negative, but it's just to expect that naturally, any relationship, there's going to be differences. And it's not your job to make that not so, but it is your job to try to really understand the other person's perspective with an open mind and an open heart, and maybe just allow that to be. And the second thing here was changing our definition of success from one of everything happens as per my desires, which is incredibly binding, right? Because nothing in the world works like that. That's just completely unrealistic. To my desires harmonize with higher realities, and allowing space for that, even if you don't understand it in the moment. Recognizing that, you know what, maybe with my limited capacity and understanding of the big picture, maybe there is something bigger happening here, something larger at play. Takeaway 5 was expanding our perceptions. Talked about the elephant and the 6 blind men that approach the elephant and see something different. How we can maybe try to approach our relationships with that broader mindset. And then our goal when we think about differences, right? We acknowledge differences, but we focus on similarities. And that's perception in the mode of goodness. And then the last point here was sharpening our communication. So the big point here is really trying to imbibe this mood of curiosity and humility. And this is tangible for people. People can feel this in the way that you talk and you show up, and even your body language, right? Like how much of this curiosity and humility you actually have. It's subtle, but it's felt. So we really want to try to realize some of these points so that we can show up like this. And that alone, again, will transform our relationships. In addition to these just kind of more trivial skills that we can just kind of be aware of as we're interacting. So that's all that I had today. And now I'll ask Damodar Priya to tell me what to do. But thank you all so much for being here and listening. And appreciate you all. And oh yeah, I do lead a Gita podcast. Um, I was actually, you know what, maybe Rukmini could come and guest star on our Gita podcast
Mm,
sometime. That'd be so
we will
wonderful.
definitely have to arrange that. But
Yeah.
yes, next we're going to be going into our breakout groups. And for those of you who are here for the first time, I will go over that in a second. I just want to read the reflection questions for those who will be watching this in the recording. So the reflection questions which we will be talking about together are, what is the biggest obstacle, whether internal or external, that prevents you from approaching conflicts with a spiritual perspective? And two is, what is one key takeaway from this session that you can implement in your life to enhance your relationship? So I'm just going to pause. Okay, so welcome back, everyone. This is our Q&A and as well as reflection section. So this is a great time to ask any questions you may have for Radha Priti, our speaker for today. Or if you have any reflections from your time together in our breakout rooms, we would love to hear from you. So please either raise your virtual hand or unmute yourself and we will love to hear from you. Let's see. We always get a little shy in the beginning. Well, if nobody has anything to share, then Rukmini, do you have something that you would like to start us off with, please?
Sure. And maybe just breaking the ice, other people will speak up. And
Ah,
I don't want
Chitraleka has her hand up,
there
so
you go.
there
Let
we
her.
go.
Hey, thank you, Hare Krishna. So thank you, Radha, for your beautiful talk, and to the women I could share with. So basically, we were sharing about, yeah, like how our upbringing and culture, it's all about, yes, like you can get what you put out there. So we talked about achievement-based love, like somehow we were raised in that way, like, okay, you get love for what you do. It's not because you are lovable, it's not because of your essence, it's because what you do. So that's mainly an obstacle we find to approach these conflicts in a more like spiritual way. So yeah, we were sharing about how important it is just to recognize that we are lovable, that we are worthy no matter of what we achieve, what we do, that we are not like in control. We don't know everything, and that we also share that it brings us to our humility. That the finding humility, finding power in being humble is actually something we want to work on. Asking for help, and it's part of that. Like yeah, there was this person sharing, like, probably asking for help, it is related to being weak, but in the other side, yeah, we find that it is a lot, there's a lot of strain in being vulnerable, in saying, I don't have the answer, I am wrong, I may be wrong, and I will certainly be wrong many times, and I do need help, and that there's a lot of power there. So yeah, it was a very beautiful talk, and we shared about, yeah, being the super women that can handle it all, that we were raised, or we were, yeah, we were like programmed to just go and yeah, fix the world. And now it is the spiritual path, the therapeutic path that they have brought us to our core value. Like, no matter if I mean, we cannot fix the world out. So how can we still be valuable and find our strength in our vulnerability? So it was very, very beautiful sharing, and very beautiful, like, that we want to take that out to the world, because the feminine values are a lot about supporting each other, and asking for help and being vulnerable. But world out there, it's a lot more patriarchal, like, no, you go, you fix that, you are strong. So yeah, I think that coming back to our feminine values will help us out to approach conflicts in a more spiritual way. Thank you.
Thank you, Chicholeka. And I see that actually, see, this always happens. Once one person puts their hands up, then nobody gets shy anymore. So thank you so much, Siham. I see you have your hand up as well. Please share.
Yeah. Thank you for this opportunity. And we miss you, Damodar Priya, on the Srimad Bhagavatam classes at the Bhakti Center. So we miss you so much, and it's good to see you again. So, like when I talk to devotees, most of the time we come down to the same conclusions and the same realization. So it's not a lot of disagreement, and sometimes it's different perspective. So what I feel when I'm having this session with you guys is just like it's the same experience and different flavors. So mainly in the breakout session, it was like we were voicing the same thing. It's just with, different perspectives. So I'm just wanted to say again that I am happy to be here. And it's my first time actually with this type of sessions. So hopefully I'll be able to join again. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
See, that's amazing that we're part of different communities, but sometimes we still have to meet each other in other ways as well. So thank you so much, Siham, for sharing that. And does anybody else have something that they would like to share, or a question for Radha Priti? Maybe something that you didn't quite catch, or a point? If not, then I know that Rukmini, you had something you wanted to share.
Yeah, I can just share our, without breaking confidentiality, unless anyone else from our group wants to speak up. We had Lori and Gaur Karuna and Martina, but we were kind of talking about cultural differences, which was interesting. Being from a Latin background, or from a Catholic background, or from a Jewish background, and how we relate to different conflicts or different stimuli, I guess I would say. And what was bringing up for me, it was interesting. I read something the other day that Pope Francis is, where is he? I think he's somewhere in South America right now. Yeah, but he was saying something about, there's so many languages and so many different religions and perspectives, but there's only one God, and there's just different languages in approaching God. And I thought, wow, this is very broad-minded for a Catholic leader. I thought it was very beautiful. And I think, I think that's kind of a very bhakti kind of a perspective, that we have different languages, we have different ways of approach, but to honor I think one thing we were talking about also was, trying to see the similarities, and, trying to see the differences after we see the similarities, which I think is a good approach to conversation. Let's try to see the similarities first, and these are the ways where we agree, but then not ignore the differences, but just maybe state or validate the similarities first, and then say, the one point where we really don't see eye to eye is XYZ, but first trying to stress the similarities. And that makes sense to me in human conversation and dialogue. And what do you guys think of that? You guys want to share anything? Lori, Gorakarna, Martina?
If not, I do see Survi has her hand up, so perhaps she has something that she can add to that.
Great.
Survi?
And maybe one of you guys, after Survi shares thoughts, maybe one of you guys will think of something.
Oh, Survi, you're still muted.
Hare Krishna. Yeah, I thought your 6 principles were absolutely wonderful, Radha Priti, and thank you so much. It was really an awesome talk. I think that there are so much to take away, and there's so much growth for everybody in those. And I see there's so many things that from each one that we can take, and I was sitting there thinking, oh, wow, I could do that, could do that, could do that. And then I was sitting there thinking, okay, I'm just maybe not, that's so much, like for me, like, okay, so much work to do. And then I thought, well, I always wish that I had more people around me that could tolerate all my not so good things, because I know I'm not perfect. So I I was just adding to that curiosity and humility chat, which I love. And that is like such a great representation. I mean, simple but sophisticated, right? And I want to just add tolerance in there as a third dimension. I know you're an engineer, Radha Priti, so you might appreciate it, having the 3 points there. And so that was what I was thinking. I just found so much in there. And the group I was with, also, what was interesting was we all recognized that much of our war starts internally. So we love that saying that, it starts internally, war starts internally and then becomes external. So we all found that that was really the case and that we all had work to do. And so we all found different parts that we could work on. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Surabhi, for that. Yeah, I also found that really profound. The war starts in us first before it gets outside into the world. And I do see that Martine has her hand up. She's driving, so hopefully she's safely driving.
Yes, I am. I was just thinking, our group, I think the crux of the core of what we're trying to each and as a community work on is to really, it isn't when there is a conflict, whether within or with other people or, micro or macro level, it is at that very center that it is the hardest to find common points, similarities, because what jumps up is what divides us, what's different with us. And to stay at that level and to try to, Laurie said, to sit with it, different ways to try to diffuse that explosive moment, and to try to say, okay, what is it that I can find common points, intersection, similarities before, so I can come out of that first emotion and really have that empathy and compassion in order to create that dialogue and connect to something that's higher than us, that's not palpable, but that really gets us to move forward step by step. So it is the hardest thing, personally.
Yes, thank you so much, Martine, for taking the time to share that with us even while you're driving. All right. And that actually goes, if nobody else has something to share, I had a question for
Sorry. I was on mute. I was just, can I share this one thought?
Oh, sure. I just had a question, but yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just thinking, I really liked what Radha Priti was saying, talking about toward the beginning about the bravery to own my, my lack, or when there's a conflict, what is my part in this disagreement? What is my part? What, and that, to me, that brings us, it's almost like it coming full circle, because she talked about that in the beginning, but the idea of curiosity and humility to see, okay, what has been my part in this conflict? And having the humility to say, I'm so sorry that I misunderstood, or I made this assumption, or whatever, and what can I do to to help solve the problems. It's almost like the bravery to own it, and then the curiosity and the humility to bring it full circle to come to a solution. I like that.
Yeah, it's taking ownership. Thank you so much for sharing that, Rukmini. And Mary, you have your hand up. Did you have something you wanted to share or a question?
Just real quick, I wanted to add, first of all, I want to say, Radha Priti, thank you so much. I really got so much out of this. I've learned over the years, one of the things I've learned, it's become clearer to me in the last few years, is that I very much operate from a place of I am unloved and I am unlovable. And so, of course, I'm already bringing that into every relationship. And one of the things we talked about, you talked about learning to live with the conflict. And one of the things I realize, I guess, the piece I need to own is, and I think it comes from my background, it comes from the culture that we live in. If you are right, then I am wrong. There's no gray in there. There's no middle. And and you talked about it, and I know I've read it in other spiritual practices. It's about living in the mystery. It's about living in the conflict and learning to be okay with that. And especially the little chart you drew, that the trajectory. I don't need to know everything. I can't know everything. I don't know everything. And if I can practice that really, like, that's one of the takeaways for me, is if I can be curious about why are you right? And I am in fact wrong, and that doesn't make me bad or unlovable or anything. It just be open to, there's a different way to see things. What is that? So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mary, for your vulnerability and sharing that, because I know that there's probably a lot of us here who have kind of struggled with that idea of feeling like we're not loved, and it really does put us into that scarcity mindset that affects our relationships with others. So the question that I got sent, Radha Priti, is for you, and I think we have time for you to hopefully answer it, was in terms of the curiosity and humility. The question was, what or how do we know when to engage the curiosity and the humility? To what point when perhaps the relationship is abusive or dysfunctional or unhealthy? How much do we then use those tools in those circumstances? So I don't know if Radha Priti, if you have a way to address that. If you're speaking, you're muted. So you just have to turn on your microphone.
Okay. Can you hear me now? Sorry. I think that can be really hard because there is a part of us that needs to protect ourselves. But I think that depending on the dynamic of the relationship, how we show up in our communication, it doesn't necessarily mean that we have to release any other control over our other boundaries. We can still approach a conversation with a level of curiosity and humility without changing our other boundaries. It doesn't mean that it's all just because we're inquiring and we're giving that person the space to express, depending on how abusive it is, things need to be handled differently. But sometimes we feel like if we relinquish control in this conversation, then we're relinquishing all control. But sometimes that's not necessarily true. We can still show up and be and have in a mood of curiosity and humility, but we can still stick to our boundaries in whatever way we have in that relationship. Just because we're kind of giving them that leeway to speak and to engage on that level, on a communication level, doesn't mean that means, that things are going to change in the boundaries we've already established, as long as we're clear about that and we still communicate that in a loving, respectful way. We could still explore in a conversational way. I don't know if that makes sense or if that's helpful, but that's actually something that I've struggled with, because sometimes I know, like, oh, I'm going to get taken advantage of. I don't even want to give this person this much because I know that then they're going to take this much. But the two don't necessarily have to be connected. You could still show up and be humble and curious, but know where you are and where you're not in your boundary with that person. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So I'm not the one that asked the question, so I don't know. I think they want to keep anonymous, but what I hear that you're saying is just that we can still keep healthy boundaries within the space of still being humble and curious, and still take care of ourselves while engaging in those energies. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. It's not mutually exclusive. And even if we have to establish a boundary with that person, we can still do it in a humble way, but without, I have a tendency to like go overboard because I think I'm on that side of the spectrum where I felt a little bit taken advantage of. So I'll like assert my, like I'm in charge here. So, and then I catch myself doing it. Or even like my husband will tell me like, you don't have to be that aggressive. And I'm like, oh, am I being aggressive? Like, I didn't even know I'm being aggressive, but it's just like my conditioning that I have to kind of like step back, like, okay, I can still own my space without having to be like bulldog over it,
Mm-hmm.
And in that way, depending on the severity of the person that you're dealing with, but it can also disarm the other person. It can also, like when I show up aggressive, then that person is going to feel like they have to show up. And so it can also kind of then have that effect where if you're creating that space on a plane that's non-threatening, on that plane of communication, then maybe that could trickle over into to other dimensions of your relationship.
But I wanted to say something that I really like the elephant example that you gave, because, none of them are wrong. It's all different perspectives. So that one is not black, one is not white. They're all right and they're all wrong in a sense. So I think that's a good way of seeing that, you're just, massaging a different part of the elephant than I am. And, if someone attacks me and says, you're such a fool, or why did you do this? Or, then I love the curious piece about what makes you feel that way. What makes you feel that way? And then I can get more insight into what's making them, dump on me or something like that,
Yeah, and just because I'm asking you what makes you feel that way, and I'm curious and I'm caring and I'm humble, it doesn't mean that I'm necessarily going to change anything on my end, but I still really care and want to hear what makes you feel. I'm still curious enough to want to see what's going on there.
Right.
Yeah.
Something about the way I approached you in this situation pushed some buttons for you. So please help me understand how to do it better next time.
Yeah. But that doesn't even mean that you have to change. Like, again, I'm just trying to tie the last question to it. Like, still show up, still do the work, and then maybe take it away and kind of contemplate on it and then decide how you want to show up.
Yeah.
Thank you. And I think Surbi has something to add to this before we'll need to start wrapping up. Yes, Surbi?
Yeah, that was a really good question and discussion then. And also, I just wanted to ask Radha Priti, I love the definition of focus on the soul and then find the mate later, the soulmate. Where did you get that from, Radha Priti? That was really cool.
Chaitanya Charan. Anything that sounds clever or catchy, I stole right from Chaitanya Charan. He's like my, he's one of my inspirations. So
very cool.
Nice. Beautiful.
Okay, so thank you again, everyone, for participating in the September Urban Davy. And thank you so much, Radha Priti, for giving us so much to kind of chew and digest. I feel like a lot of us are still trying to get that down. So just as a reminder, this recording will be available on Rukmini Walker's YouTube, and all of the links for that are in the chat. Also, as Rukmini kind of leads us off to finish our time together, I really encourage everyone to please write in the chat any positive feedback that you may have for Radha Priti so that I can share it with her later on. It's always nice to kind of send those little notes of appreciation to the speaker via email afterwards. So thank you again, Radha Priti. We really appreciate it. And thank you to all of us who are joining us. And Rukmini, please lead us away.
Yeah, so if you want to mark your calendars, because this Urban Davy Sangha is a different Sunday every month, depending on, we have to avoid holidays and this and that. So if you want to mark your calendars, our next one will be October 20th. And we have a really wonderful young woman, Jai Gopali, who will be speaking, and her topic is 5 Lessons from the Dying. She recently lost her mother, and it was a really a big journey for her and her family. Let me just read to you what she says in a little synopsis. Death is the one inevitable truth we all face, yet it remains a topic many avoid. In this deeply personal talk, Jai Gopali shares the profound lessons learned from the passing of her own mother and her experiences as a junior doctor in the UK to explore the profound lessons that death teaches us. Though death is the one certainty in life, it's often surrounded by fear and silence. We will explore the deeply human and universal realities of dying, revealing the wisdom, love, and clarity that can emerge from facing mortality. Through these lessons, Jai Gopali invites us to confront our own fears, deepen our connections, and live with greater intention and grace. So I'm really looking forward to that. Please join us in October 20th. Thank you so much. Thank you. Damodar Priya. Thank you, Radha Priti.